out. Hold on, let me move back here. Hey, live streamers. So these are our sponsors. They make this food that you're shoveling into your face right now happen every week. So we are mucho thankful for their wonderful, wonderful support. So why don't you guys give them a round of applause? Let's just give them a round of applause right now. There we go. Some excitement here. Okay, so we've got Nicole here. Nicole's going to talk to us a little bit about a startup week. Nicole.
Hi, I am Nicole, project manager for Startup Week and event manager for Collab. So for those of you who have not been to Startup Week, it happens the first week of October, the 3rd through 7th. We have over 150 events that are happening. About 20 of those are specifically tech related. A lot of them fall into different categories, but if you want to check out the schedule, go to www.startupweekcha.com. You can log in, create your own account, and then create an online calendar. So that information is on these cards. I will leave them right up here. And if you have any questions right now, I can take them from you. If you happen to be an event host, thank you for hosting an event. And we have one final event host meeting on Monday, the 26th, in this space from 5:30 to 6:30. You can pick up posters and t-shirts and other swag and ask any final questions about the event. Great, thank you.
All right, any other community announcements? Anybody want to give a shout out to their meetup? No? Yes? Yes, Nick. Yeah, we need to get you this mic.
Yeah, the Agile meetup's next Wednesday, and the talk is entitled, well, it's a discussion for everybody, essential elements of communication for successful project delivery. So developers are involved in that conversation, so it'd be nice to have a few of you come along, talk about that with other people involved in the process. There'll be pizza as well and drinks. So next Wednesday night, 5 o'clock at BDC. All the details are on meetup.com. Just look for Agile Chattanooga. Hope to see you there.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, that was a weak showing on the applause, but I'll give you another chance later. Yeah, so that should be it. We have Ian here. Ian's going to talk to us today about a project that he's been working on, and I won't spoil any more, but everybody give it up for Ian. He's going to tell us about it.
Thanks, everybody. So some of you may know me. I was a back-end web developer in Chattanooga until last year. How do I sound, by the way? Can everybody hear me? Excellent. And so I'm here to especially give the background for my project and why it interests me and like why it's an exciting and important idea for me. And my goal is hopefully to inspire some of you to at least talk to me about it over email or whatever, because I'm not that experienced of a developer, and I could really use counsel and advice on various parts of it. So hopefully some of you will be excited about it by the end. So the story starts in 2011 when I have an econ degree, don't know anything about programming, and I open up a Ruby book in Barnes & Noble. And over the next few years, I get exposed to all of these various tools, kind of the professional computing tools. And they're buggy, and some of them don't work well together, and overall, they are fantastic. Postgres is rock solid. We have Linux servers. We're in the middle of a language renaissance. There's been a bunch of advances in Haskell, and then there's also AnnoCamel, Clojure, Swift, Go. Elixir is popular here in Chattanooga. So while these tools have problems, they generally give the feel of a bunch of really talented, excited people working on them and general forward movement. And there's kind of casual computing. So when I was getting computers, smartphones were coming out, iPads were coming out. These are pretty incredible. And they get a bad rap for social reasons, like, they're bad for society or whatever. But I think it's really cool that like someone in a nursing home who doesn't know what a computer is can like send email and stay in touch with her friends, across the country. That's awesome. And so together, in my opinion, these deserve 2 Wonders of the Modern World slots if we were giving out, like making a list of the 7 wonders of the modern world. Especially because the industrial software stuff, a lot of it is free. So we have these billion-dollar companies making these fantastic tools, and we don't even pay for them. We just get them and can do whatever we want with them, and that's awesome. So as I was learning programming, I felt like I was kind of entering this sci-fi story. Like, the world was very exciting, and like there were all these breakthroughs, and it was really great. But something was wrong, because there's another kind of computing, in my opinion. This is very arbitrary. But what if instead of kind of the industrial software, that's like Ambition or bellhops, you've got mobile devs, you've got backend devs, you've got front-end devs, lots of professionals working full-time on something. What about like, a small business of like 2 or 3 people? Or maybe like a programmer working on a side project, but it's just, just him or her, and they're just gonna spend a few hours and throw something together. And this kind of like intellectual, creative work at the computer, just one person trying to automate something or do something interesting. We're just gonna call it computer operation here. And in this field, I expected to get the same feeling that I got from the other 2 categories of computing, where it's like, oh yeah, this is buggy, and like a lot of this doesn't work, but overall it's like, improving and it's awesome. But instead of feeling like a sci-fi story, it started to feel a little bit strange, and like something felt seriously, seriously wrong. And so this talk is going to explore what's wrong, but from here on we're moving out of the sci-fi world and we're entering the horror genre. We're putting on our detective hats, and we're going to try to figure out what is going on. Like, the very first project I did where I was like, this is really difficult. I was just this baby programmer. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a dashboard for my life. It's gonna show like what car maintenance stuff is coming up, what doctor appointments are coming up, what my savings are like, maybe my to-do list for the week. This should be really easy. And that was actually very difficult. Immediately you're starting to mess with like, weird authentication protocols you've never seen before to get this data and stuff. And this project, which should have been an afternoon project, just like died in the mire. And so that's just like one example. This doesn't prove anything that this category of computing is going badly. It was enough to make me nervous. So at this point, my feeling has switched from kind of just general optimism about the world when I'm thinking about like, when I'm working with like Postgres or Haskell or whatever. And my emotions are now kind of in the story, alarm and dismay. And so people argue all the time about, oh, the problem is JavaScript is bad, or like whatever. They say all this stuff. And in my opinion, that's not the core of the problem. We're going to apply my biases to the problem. I'm a functional programmer. I am interested in data flow. So this is just an arbitrary person here. This is all made up. But I would say this is simplified compared to the real-world people that I've talked to about where their data is stored. And instead of this person, like just a normal person having their data in one place, maybe 2 or 3 places, they've got a laptop and a desktop and a phone. A normal person nowadays has their data in like 24 places. They do have their laptop, their desktop, their phone. Some of their data is there. And then some of it is just in these random places. Like they write a book review, and the book review is on a server in like, Las Vegas or something, instead of, on their actual computer. And same for everything. Like this is a more appropriate diagram for like 1,000-person businesses IT than it is for like, our Joe Smith. Again, this is made up, but hopefully you guys view this as fair. I imagine most of us have data in like 24 places like me. And like I fought it hard. I try to do everything I can, do everything on Linux, and I fail. So next, our next goal is to explore why did we get in this situation? Because something's wrong, but we don't really know what happened yet. And so our exploration is going to start with the most basic question people ask when they talk to each other about computers: what operating system do you use? And this is kind of the normal way we interact with like kind of our own, we're all adults, we're in charge of keeping our own lives in order. It's like, oh, do you use Mac? Like, I use Linux. Like, this is what I like about Linux. And this is an okay question. But I think this is immediately portraying some of our kind of, computing is new, but lack of sophistication about how we view this kind of computer operation, just one person interacting with a computer. Because the operating system is actually not the most important thing. Like, your device drivers and all that stuff do matter, but I don't think this deserves to be the first, definitely not the only question we ask about, like, how do you do computing? And for an example of where I think this falls down, I'm going to use Emacs. So Emacs is a text editor. It's grown. It can do lots of other stuff besides edit text. You can make spreadsheets. You can make to-do lists. You can send email. Obviously, you can program. And so if one person is using Emacs on OS X, and another person is using Emacs on Linux, I think these two people have more in common by far than one person using Linux, a Linux desktop with the nice kind of Windows icons, mouse pointer setup, and another person using Emacs on Linux. The two Emacs users have more in common with each other than the two Linux users, but our kind of basic question that we ask each other when we're trying to kind of figure out, how do you do computing, is totally falling over here. So we're going to make up a new word. In fact, actually, we're going to steal a word. User environment right now, as far as I can tell, just means like kind of your environment variables and all that stuff. We're going to steal, modify, language evolves. For the rest of this talk, user environment is going to mean the kind of paradigm that you use when you're interacting with data on your computer. Paradigm. And so let's see. So in this sense, Emacs is a user environment. Unix command line is user environment. That's what I try to use. That's my preference. Not a huge preference, but it's just like what I do. Windows, icon, mouse, pointer. It's the standard desktop. I'm not sure if PowerShell has been expanded to do all computing if you wanted to send email at PowerShell, but I'm sure it could. And so I think this is it's really useful to have a term for this. Another thing people might use instead of user environment is platform, but platform is so broad. I don't think it's a really useful term either, because you have a platform for like medical devices or Internet of Things or whatever, and I wanted a word for just one person sitting at one computer and how that interaction is taking place. And already we've gotten our first clue, because we're detectives and we're trying to figure out the source of the kind of this scary kind of situation we found ourselves in. And why are web browsers on here? So the web is a system of documents that are hyperlinked to each other. Why can let's rename web browsers and say they're originally basically web perusers. You kind of peruse these documents. Why does your kind of document peruser send email and emulate Linux? I think you can do that in a web browser, and watch videos in it. This is kind of weird. And so we're having some success as detectives right now. Like a similar, at this point, honestly, it's hard to get your mind switched and be like, oh, it's weird that web browsers can play video inside of them and can run arbitrary programs inside of them. But in my opinion, it is weird. This took me a while to figure out. In an alternate universe, like, I don't know, some people here might be familiar with Calibre. It's a program for managing ebooks. And it's a little bit, it's cool, it's open source, but maybe it's a little bit bloated. In an alternate universe, let's say Calibre expanded, so you could watch videos in Calibre, and you could run programs in Calibre, and people were doing their banking in Calibre. This would be really odd. We would be like, why is my, okay, so first, I have this thing that I'm supposed to be reading books in, and instead it's doing like banking inside of it. That's weird. You know, my bank wants me to do my banking inside of a book reader. I trust you less now. And then secondly, my book reading experience is just falling apart because I didn't actually want people delivering general purpose programs along with their books. I just wanted books. And now your book is like playing like videos and pop-up ads and stuff. This would be very frustrating. And this is kind of what has actually happened, but with documents instead of books. The rest of the talk is going to focus on web browsers. Oh yeah, everybody in here uses web browsers all the time. They're meant to do documents. We're not using them for everything. They're kind of taken over. And I'm not going to talk about the other user environments. Computer operation is my interest here. And that includes Linux and OS X and Emacs and all that stuff. But for this talk, I'm just going to focus on web browsers. And I'm going to skip everything else except to say they have failed to outcompete web browsers. So as good as your Linux command line system is, if it doesn't spread enough and fast enough to get other people to use it, and everybody else in the world, except for us in this room, uses the web, we will get pulled onto the web too. We can't hold out against the entire world. You know, we're cool, but a social network of like 100 people is not that useful. So I'm just going to focus on web browsers. The browser user environment. So I'm already combining my made-up words with, and using them again in this talk, sorry. And so the rest of this talk is going to be focused on the browser user environment. And let's see how I define it. So I already mentioned that I have no problem with the system of hyperlinked documents accessible over HTTP. I'm not coming for your hyperlinks. I have no problem with HTML, JS, CSS. JavaScript is not a beginner-friendly language, but that's not the worst. Like, you know, professional programmers aren't beginners. And so all the criticisms about like double equals versus triple equals will not show up in this talk. That's not important compared to what I am interested in. And my problem isn't with like Firefox, Chrome, or Safari. I think they're all great programs. They've had like 100,000 top expert person hours thrown into them. So they're all very impressive pieces of technology. Someone using the Unix command line might have a PDF they want to read. They might open it up with Firefox to view their PDF. That's totally cool, and it's great that Firefox can do that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking, for the rest of the talk, we're going to be talking about the browser user environment, the standard browser user environment, as 99% of people use it. And so that's, the browser is the only program that you're running on your computers. You're connecting to somebody else's server. You're sending the data out to there. And you're not just connecting to one server. You're connecting to a different server roughly per web app or user interface that you're using. So I have 5 different types of data I want to create. I probably have data going to 5 different companies' servers. Maybe 4, companies like Google will have a few different or lots of different web apps, and it will all end up on Google. And so that helps some, but still in general, the more user interfaces you use, the more your data gets spread out. And it's actually a really, like the weirdness is continuing. The desire to use more user interfaces and interact with more data, that number should not be connected to the number of data stores that you're using. That's not a necessary connection. And so to continue the horror theme, I'm going to talk about Tolkien for a second. I actually think, weirdly enough, he's a really good horror writer. And he has this character, Anatar, who comes to these people, the civilization in his world, when they've just had a lot of sorrow and they're in real trouble. And he teaches them things, and he gives them all these wonderful gifts. And they build their civilization based on his gifts. And I think it's actually a really good analogy for browsers, because browsers do a lot of really useful stuff. They're not a technology like bloodletting, where bloodletting is just trendy. Like humans love trends. Trends can last for 1,000 years or whatever. That's not browsers. Browsers do awesome things. And there's a reason that they became popular. They provided real value. This gets to why I'm kind of skipping over Linux in this talk, because some people say that like oh, the answer to our computing problems is we should just get more people to install Linux and teach them the command line. And I don't think that's right, partly for technical reasons. I think there are things that the browser user environment does better than Linux. And one of those is you can install a program with one click. Program's sandboxed. And it also auto-updates. So this is a huge deal. This is definitely like the way things should be. And that's a huge advantage for if you want to spread and get lots of people to use a particular user environment. And so there's a reason that we got hooked on this. Especially if you read back in the 90s, there are all these programmers that are really excited about the web. Like, they thought the web was awesome. And these are like good programmers, like Paul Graham or whatever. And the reason is because, in my opinion, is they were so terrified of Windows and how long the deploy cycle was to just update their software on Windows, that they would just do anything to get out of that horrible situation. And unfortunately, they trusted a system that in the long run was not technically sweet, and that just evolved and was headed in a bad direction, even though at the moment it was better than Windows for sure. And so one of those, you can actually deploy your programs, you can update them without this just eternity-long shipping cycle. Your data is managed by professionals with browsers. So like so I'm just at this point very untrustworthy of browsers, but if I talk to normal, like sophisticated people, like I have a mechanical engineer brother, and I talked to him about browsers, and he's like, yeah, I love using web browsers, and because his data is safer. And he's actually right about this. And Amazon can take like meteor strikes to their data centers, and they won't lose your data. The data on my tower at home will not survive a meteor strike. And I do offsite backups sometimes, but in general, professionals will do a far better job taking care of your data than individuals will. So whatever system we end up with, at some point it needs to have an option where you can say, Google, take care of my stuff. I think that's awesome. I think attempts to be like, oh, we should just go back to the old way of everybody having a server in their closet are misguided, at least by default. That can be a useful option sometimes. Browsers have an open user interface specification. I'm not sure if I'm totally using user interface in the right way, but what I mean by this is the front end. HTML, JavaScript, CSS are open specifications. And people program with those as their target. And so that's cool. Originally, the idea would also be that you would see the source code, at least for the user interface that you're dealing with. Right now, you're more likely to see kind of a jumble of compiled, minified stuff. But still, it was a cool goal. And so that draws browsers a lot of activist support. This is why like Mozilla is excited about web browsers, or one of the reasons. And then they provide a monetization strategy. So this is really important because Emacs is really cool. Unix command line is really cool. Neither of them have monetization strategies at all. And so they get no corporate support, or a very small amount, compared to the hundreds of billions of dollars that go into web browser, web apps and stuff. And so that's an important thing to have. And you really want a way to make people who use your user environment money. That's just really important. And browsers do that. So I feel like we're succeeding in our detective work to some extent. Browsers started as a document reader, and they expanded in kind of a creepy way to get on all of our computers. But we're at least succeeding, and we know why they expanded. I feel like this is a pretty good list. I'm sure I'm missing stuff. But in general, like, that's a powerful list of benefits. That's very seductive. So why am I up here giving the talk if browsers have all these cool benefits? And I'm going to say browsers. What I mean is the browser user environment. Again, I'm not talking about opening up a PDF with Firefox. I mean where you're actually storing data on lots of different other servers, not your own computers. This is a really bad system. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of the reasons why this is a serious problem and ties into just our general problems with computer operation going really wrong right now. So the first problem, the first scary thing, amnesia. You're using the browser user environment. I might write up a long wiki entry on like something I'm interested in, something that's important to me or whatever. I put a lot of effort into this. And so I write this document, and I hit send, and immediately my computers have totally forgotten about this document. They don't store it anywhere. The browser doesn't keep track of it. I can't query my browser and say, what are the last 5 things that I wrote? Instead, it goes to somebody else's servers, some wiki hosting company or whatever. And if I want the data back, I have to request it from these people who are basically strangers to me. And so that's a serious problem. When you create data on a computer, the data should be stored on that computer. And it can also be shared with other people. But there's no reason your own computer shouldn't keep track of it. And browsers do not do that. Second thing is confusion. So this is, I feel like, one of the more important points of this talk, and also the one that I have the most trouble explaining. So I'm going to think about how I'm going to do this for a second. If I explain this badly and it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It's not essential to the talk. But in general, you want to be interacting with the kind of primary copy of your data, the original source. This comes up a lot in various kinds of programming. If you're interacting with something that was derived from the source, but not the actual source, things can get confused very quickly. And so in the case of browsers, you write something, let's say in Wikipedia markup, but it could be anything to go anywhere. Let's see, book review or sales reports or whatever you're interested in. And you write it in a text box. It goes off to somebody else's server. When you ask for it back, the thing that you get is not, by default, is not that original piece of data. It's that original piece of data mixed in with a bunch of other stuff. And again, this is just the default. By default, we have now lost track of our original creation. So this is not a great example because nobody would care too much about a Wikipedia front page edit. But say you're living back in the early 2000s, and you care a lot about wikis, and so you take your expertise and you have written a paragraph introducing Wikipedia. So you wrote that paragraph in Wikipedia markup on your computer. You hit enter, your computer lost track of it. It still has it somewhere, but if you have no way to access it using your kind of default tools, then it's basically lost, unless you want to start searching your hard drive for it. And so you wrote some Wikipedia markup. This is we all do this every day. So this actually, once you realize this, it's a huge source of frustration. So don't listen to this part of the talk. You wrote it in Wikipedia markup. You send it off to Wikipedia. You get it back. And what we have here isn't Wikipedia markup. It's HTML and CSS and stuff. And then we're not even working on the thing that we just wrote. We don't have a way to view that. Instead, we're looking at the thing we just wrote, this wiki page, mixed in with all this other stuff, like the website. And so here, my problem actually does start to some extent, become a problem with websites. We're not viewing a single document. We're viewing a document mixed together with login info and all this other stuff. This doesn't matter so much for Wikipedia. For one thing, Wikipedia is a good web citizen. If we want to view the thing we originally wrote, we can click on history, we can click on our edit, and it will actually show us the thing that we wrote. We can see what Wikipedia had before we wrote our thing, what it had after, and that's the actual source of the changes we made. But a lot of websites won't do that at all. And so at that point, we We wrote our thing. We forgot it, amnesia. We're asking for it back from strangers. We're not getting it back. We're getting an HTML-derived version of it back, mixed in with other stuff. And the original is gone. It doesn't matter that much for Wikipedia stuff, but say you're doing something more important, like anything important. Let's see, I don't know, like you're making a business report or you're like filling out a medical form. The desire to say, I want to see the exact form I filled out is like a real thing. And by default, a website fails down on that front. It matters especially if you want to programmatically interact with the thing you made. So maybe you were using a web app that was making JSON and sending JSON up, and you need your JSON back because you want to actually do something with it, but you don't get it back. And so at least not through this interface. And so some websites have APIs, some don't. Some APIs actually match the data that you originally sent up, some don't. There's no requirement to. And so these two problems are working together. So it wouldn't be that big of a deal if websites didn't give us our original data back, if they mixed it together with markup, the confusion thing, if we would store original copies. But we don't store a copy, and then they don't, by default, give it back. So we're in huge trouble. All right, so the most serious problem here, and this is actually the most intellectually interesting part of the talk, probably. So I'm kind of proud to get to talk about this horrible thing that I've discovered. Isolation. So browsers have, I would say, better sharing features than something like Linux. Linux has Finger, it has SFTP, it has SSH. Those are all hard to use for normal people. Browsers get lots of great PR about how, like, I'm going to call it the browser user environment, lets you share data with lots of other people. In my opinion, this sharing is broad, but it's shallow. When you want to share like a tweet with the whole world, you can do that with the browser user environment. Or well, let's not say a tweet, let's say a short status update. And that's awesome. Like, that's really cool that we can do that and it's free. That's really exciting. So it's not bad. Broad but shallow is not the worst. But let's say we want to share a lot of data with a small number of people. That's the situation I find myself in at the moment. So I'm living in a place without a lot of programmers. I have some very close programming friends. I'd love to see like everything they're up to, and I'd share with this small number of people. I would share all this stuff, and they would share it with me. Our notes, our little snippets of code, our big projects. Basically, the contents of like our code directories on our computers. And browsers don't provide a way to share. They give a lot of friction if you want to share a lot of data with people. And that goes back to this problem. Because if you have a really close friendship with somebody and you want to be able to see most of the stuff they're doing, everything that's not explicitly secret. Let's say I want to share all of that information with you, Greg. So I could go through site by site and say, share, private Twitter stuff with Greg, Goodreads book reviews with Greg, my comments, and my GitHub, my gists, all that stuff, and Facebook, everything. By the end of it, I've gone through like 20 different permissions dialogues. You have a different username on each of those sites, or many of those sites, and so it's a ton of work. And every time I want to, every time I want to add a new data type, like say I get into JavaScript and I start using one of those cool JavaScript sites on the web that also like interprets your JavaScript for you. That's another place where I have to find your username. And so the work just expands. And this is just sharing data with one person. What if I want to share data with 5 people? And so at this point, we've entered, I could be messing with permissions like 60 times. The situation gets worse when you consider what like Facebook is doing, because Facebook, and this is really cool of them, I understand why they're doing it, but their privacy permissions are now like jet engine controls. They're like 3 pages long and like, very detailed. And that's awesome. But if other companies, and as other companies implement that, it's not going to be a small process. It's going to be, I'm going to be messing with 20 different privacy fighter control level of complication systems. And the situation will just get more and more complicated. And so browsers in this way are very isolating. They allow you to share some stuff with the whole world, but they don't allow more intimate sharing with a small number of people. So it's hard to share data stored in multiple places, a lot of sharing friction. But browsers gave us all this good stuff. So we're kind of reaching the end of our exploration as detectives of this rather nasty situation we found ourselves in. A lot of stuff has gone seriously wrong. We're a long ways away from Postgres and how nice that is. But maybe this is just a toss-up. Maybe it's like 50-50 computer operation, user environments. Maybe they'll be kind of bad, but that's okay. We can't win every single one. I actually don't, I think that's a reasonable way of looking at things. But personally, I don't agree with it. Partly because I want to be able to use a good computer during my lifetime. I'm pretty happy with my setup right now, but if everybody else in the whole world switches to doing everything in the browser, then it's going to get pretty lonely on Linux desktop. And so I would get pulled that direction as well. But then, kind of at a more personal level, I came to programming really late in life, and I wish I discovered it earlier. This is my fault. I'm not bitter about it. But the idea of somebody's kind of rare moment of curiosity appearing, and they're like, okay, computers are scary, but I'm going to pop the hood. I'm going to try to figure some of this stuff out. And the idea of them popping the hood, some poor kid in the middle of nowhere, he's like, okay, I want to see how this works. And what he gets is this. And so this kind of wasteland of computer operation. His data is spread, just smeared across the entire world. Most of it isn't on his computer. The JavaScript actually starts to hurt a little bit here because with browsers, you only get this one language, and it isn't beginner friendly. And this is just a really ugly face to put forward. It's just really a sad face to put forward to beginners. And I think we can do better than this. And so I'm interested in replacing web browsers, both for my own personal use as kind of a semi-expert when I want to do computing tasks that can be automated, and also for poor people who have to deal with our creation, our monstrous creation. And so the fight is on. So we're going to go after, at least I'm going to go after web browsers and try to hunt them down and build a replacement. So hopefully in a few years, we'll have a better system. Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. So that's at least the background on my project. It's a lot to cover. But hopefully this is what we'll end up with. So data, you have a person creating stuff that's going on to their different devices. It gets synced from there to a single place. The sync may not be total. For instance, you might not want all of your data going on your phone. So you would have syncing controls. But you'd only have one set of syncing controls. And so that's an acceptable amount of difficulty for a normal person to handle. And then from that single place, it can flow to the outside world, but only after you actually have a copy of it yourself. And so that's the project I'm working on. The project's got a name, Junior Schematics. It's got a website. This talk is drawn from the first post on the website. So I'll talk a little bit next about the details of my current plan for building a browser competitor. But first, I want to check and see if anybody's got any questions so far, or comments, or if I've made any just glaring mistakes, besides saying browser instead of browser user environment, which I did like 5 times. So do we kind of buy into the most important thing? Did I make my case well that unlike industry and casual computing, there's something going wrong with kind of the one-person personal computing? Make that case reasonably well? Somewhat? Thanks, Brett. Okay, because if anybody has questions about that, like the entire project doesn't make sense if you think that the single person computing is going acceptably. And it's a very gray area because it's like, you know, industry computing is buggy too. It's hard to make a provable case that we've done something seriously wrong as opposed to just natural, like, software is hard problems. But I'm going to assume that I've hopefully somewhat made that case and talk a little bit about my own project next then. How are we doing on time, Josh? Okay, cool. So this is good because I'll get to do a little overview of the stuff I'm interested in. So the first thing that I'm interested in is that your data should end up in a single place. And now I'm going to break my rule, and I am going to say some bad stuff about Linux, which I'll probably regret. Unfortunately, all of my friends who love Linux are also just huge computing experts. And so if I make a mistake on this point, they will find it. But that's OK. I learned something each time I criticize Linux. So anyway, so personal data store. Your data should end up in one place. Why can't that just be a file system? Why can't you just have you know, a hosted Linux server and just send everything there? And my personal opinion is that a hierarchical file system is fine for a small amount of computing work. They work really well as kind of your desk for a single project. I think my guess is that part of the reason is they kind of trigger the kind of mind map that people can build in their heads. You know? So it's not organized in a principled way. You kind of remember, like, oh, this stuff is in this folder, this stuff is in this folder, and so on. But there's a reason that, like, Facebook doesn't store all of Facebook's data on a hierarchical file system somewhere, you know, with, like, users / and then that directory has all the users. Because at a huge, huge scale, hierarchical file systems become messy. And unfortunately, as we saw with personal computing, even one person's data storage, you know, over a whole lifetime of using different kinds of data, really does start to add up. And so I don't think hierarchical file systems are appropriate for to store one person's entire life in. And there's a really exciting project called Camly Store that inspired some of these ideas. If you want to read more about this kind of personal data store thing, Camly Store is the place to start. There's a link to it near the end of the slides. And so that's one of the things that I'm interested in, is how to make a really good personal data store. So basically, the problem with a hierarchical file system is when you want to link to like a particular like book review. You pull in not only the name of the book review, which as professional programmers, that's already making us nervous, but because we'd rather refer to it by an ID that won't change, but also the kind of organization strategy of your whole computer, because you know it's like / my writing / 2016 / book reviews, or like whatever way I have it organized. And when you change that organization, that link breaks. So my interest is in making a data store that's kind of at a dumber level than a file system, that's just IDs to data, and so that won't break. And I think that's a better option that starts to make having a single personal data store be a more achievable goal than trying to use a file system. Another goal is a unified user interface. So on both web browsers and on something like Linux, if you want to create something, you're actually kind of on your own. You're already looking at the documentation just to create something. So like on Linux, like if I want to create a new Postgres database, it's like create DB. If I want to create a note, I use Vim and I go to my notes folder. If I want to create an email, I use my email program. And then same for the browser. The browser doesn't provide any kind of unified user interface for interacting with data in in that way. Kind of one of the few things that the browser does provide that works the same on every site is the back button. And I think that's actually an awesome inspiration. Like, people love their back buttons. They're really useful. It's awesome that no matter whether you're like New York Times or at Facebook, you can hit your hotkey for back and it will work. And so I think that's, like, it sounds like a small thing, but that's an exciting example of like people banding together to defend like the one part of the unified user interface they actually get with web browsers. Because people will leave sites and like they will pass on deals if the site like mess with their back button, and that's really cool. It's nice that people have been able to hold that line. And I think that can be expanded out for all kinds of CRUD operations. A button for creating. So for instance, if you have a piece of data selected, there can be a create another piece of the same type of data button. And then if you don't have anything selected, create could just bring up a search bar with all the different types of data your computer knows how to make. Same for updating, deleting, and then viewing data. Also undo, redo, back, forward. So basically, I'm interested in building a user interface or a user environment that is kind of this data multi-tool that handles a lot of the kind of CRUD operations in a very standardized way. And then I also think that's exciting. Hopefully, I'm not a user interface guy, but I think that's an exciting idea for user interface people, because the little I've seen of that field, you get tired of making, yet another video viewer or document editor or something. It's a much more exciting project to be like, okay, I have this kind of data multi-tool is taking care of all these basic stuff. I'm hired because I have a weird piece of data that is really different. It doesn't need standard CRUD operations. It's like a stranger kind of user interface, like some kind of video editing that doesn't fit CRUD operations at all, and nobody's ever done it before. And so hopefully this will make user interface design a more fun field, because it will take some of the weight of like, let's make 500 different edit post buttons for 500 different websites, and it'll more be like, let's do something that nobody's ever done before. Or let's take something nobody's ever done before and like that people have done before and make it even better. And then this ties in with the isolation point earlier. But I think the only way to compete with web browsers, well, there are a couple of different ideas. One is we'll push Linux harder, and we'll fight web browsers by pushing Linux harder. I don't agree with that. Another is we'll use activism. And so there are like 200 big Silicon Valley tech companies. We're going to use activism, and we're going to be like, you guys all have to have good privacy settings and good export formats. And this is kind of like a boil the ocean strategy. I think it's acceptable as a rearguard strategy. In the long run, trying to convince every company in the world to have a good export format is just like a wearying idea, and not one I'm excited about. So my interest is competing with browsers based on making something technically better. And it can't be twice as good because there are like 4 billion people using web browsers right now, so the network effects are just insane. It has to be like 100 times as good. And I think the biggest weak point that browsers have that we might actually be able to build something that's 100 times better is a system for sharing a lot of data with a small number of people. To pick an example that I'm sure everybody here is familiar with your coworkers. I think, for me at least, if I'm collaborating with people on a project, I would like to give them permission to see everything that I'm working on in my collaboration folder. And so right now we kind of get that with GitHub, but for instance, we can't put secret credentials in GitHub. And so when something breaks on my machine, I'm like, I wonder if this is a credential issue. And so I have to message my friend on Slack and be like, hey, what was your secret config set up when this worked on your machine? Because it's not working on mine. You changed the config. And so if I could just view the exact state of the project on his machine, assuming that he shared that part of his computer with me, this would be way more efficient. And so this idea of instead of being able to communicate really well with John Smith in England, and he can see my tweet about the election, whatever, that's cool. But instead, let's focus on being able to communicate really well with a very small number of people, or a medium number of people, I think is one of the few things that browsers do so badly that we might be able to make a competitor that's 100 times better. And here are some other projects that partly inspire this idea. Tent.io is not listed here, but I interned there in 2013. And so I'm working on this project with their blessing. And a lot of the ideas also came from Tent, especially about the importance of a personal data store. And now I'll open it up for questions again. If anybody's got anything they want to ask about.
So you mentioned Sandstorm as kind of an inspiration. I'm kind of curious on some of the similarities and differences.
Yeah. Sure. So Sandstorm is a really cool project. I'm going to start gesturing my hands here because I'm out of diagrams. So I think the Sandstorm project and I both agree that the problem isn't like browsers as software. And in fact, Sandstorm uses browsers to really good effect because with Sandstorm, you have a personal server and it's following the Sandstorm protocol. It's an open protocol. So if you don't like your Sandstorm host, you can switch. I'm not sure if you can right now because I think the only Sandstorm hosts are the company Sandstorm. But in the long run, you'll be able to switch. So your data is going to the single place Sandstorm, but you're using normal web apps. And these web apps have been taken and twisted, modified to instead of sending their data to some company's server just like anywhere, Las Vegas, instead it goes, the web app has been modified to communicate only with your Sandstorm server. So your user experience doesn't change that much because you're just using, you just open up the web browser, you go to sandstorm.io, you get a list of all the apps you've installed. You can install any app you want, web app, that knows how to communicate with Sandstorm. But when you click on a web app and you start using it, it just looks like a normal web app. So you don't have to learn any new user interface, but your data is all going to your Sandstorm server, so you don't need to worry about export or anything like that. You control your Sandstorm server, and you can export anything you want from there. So that's a summary of Sandstorm for people that don't know about it. All of these are small projects. Well, Sandstorm is medium. So the difference between what I'm interested in and Sandstorm is actually like kind of big. So I think Sandstorm's awesome, but my interest is having that single data store that all of your data is in. And Sandstorm still actually, you control your whole Sandstorm server. The data is still somewhat siloed. So you use two different web apps, and the data is stored in different places on that same server. It's not tossed together. And there are cool reasons for doing that, for security reasons and so on. But it's just kind of different than my interests. And then my interest in the data multi-tool really starts to diverge from Sandstorm. Because I'm like, oh man, it would be awesome if you had an undo button on your computer. And no matter what change you just made to that computer, as long as it didn't involve input-output with the rest of the world, you can't undo sending an email. But any other change, you pop open some app, you mess with the settings, and you're like, wow, I didn't mean to do that. You just undo, and it's fixed. I think that's really exciting, and so that's just kind of diverging from what Sandstorm is excited about. It's just a different thing. Thanks.
We are pretty much out of time. If you guys want to stick around and ask Ian some more questions, I think you've got time, right? To stick around and talk to folks.
Definitely.
Yeah. Otherwise, let's give it up for Ian.